Gradually making your training harder, known as progressive overload, is essential for muscle growth. In fact, it's one of the two cornerstones of muscle building. A high-protein diet and progressive overload are the two signals that your body needs to adapt and produce more muscle fiber. But you probably don't have time to read 10 different studies. So in this video, I'm going to make it easy to understand, and even more importantly, show you how to use it in your own training. Imagine every time you go to the gym, you use the same amount of weight, the same rep scheme, and the same amount of rest for each exercise. Eventually, your body would become used to the physical demands, and your gains would plateau. To avoid this, we need to gradually increase the difficulty of each session. But what should we change? The two things you can change are load and volume. Load can be called intensity and means how close to your maximum weight you are. So if your 1 rep maximum is 100 and you use 80, then the next week you use 90, you are using a higher load. Volume describes the total amount of exercise you do. So 3 sets of 10 repetitions is less volume than 4 sets of 10 repetitions. When it comes to muscle growth, known as muscle hypertrophy, scientists looked over numerous studies and compiled the results in something called a meta-analysis. They found that load doesn't influence growth as much as total work done, or volume and effort exerted, or how close they were to failure. But when it comes to increasing strength, heavier weight or load seems to be best. Heavy weight forces your body to use the strongest groups of muscle fibers. These are your high threshold motor units. This process leads to your brain and muscles working together better, known as neural adaptation, so you become able to lift heavier things. The findings of these studies are interesting if you want to build as much muscle as possible, because just lifting heavy might not be the ideal plan. From the many studies that we've analysed, it seems that you should focus on progressive overload of volume while staying near failure. There are 6 methods you could use to add progressive overload to your training. Each has their own advantages and disadvantages depending on your overall goal and how experienced you are. The most commonly used method is progressing load, which means gradually increasing the weight you use on an exercise. It's generally recommended that you increase the weight in small increments to reduce the risk of injury and overall fatigue. For smaller muscle groups like biceps, 1 to 5 pounds could be enough, and for larger multi-joint movements like squats and deadlifts, 5 to 10 pounds might be appropriate. This method challenges the muscles to produce greater force, and as previously mentioned, is ideal for increasing muscular strength, but it does help with muscle growth as well because of increased mechanical tension. Another popular strategy is progressing repetitions while keeping the weight the same. Research shows that increasing repetitions to the point of muscular failure can be just as effective as increasing load for stimulating muscle growth. This method increases the time the muscles are under tension and enhances metabolic stress. Both are significant drivers of muscle growth. In a similar vein, progressing volume can also be used by increasing the number of sets performed of a particular exercise throughout your workout. You could also increase the frequency of workouts targeting a specific muscle group. A gradual increase in volume, no more than 10 to 20% per week, is recommended to avoid the risk of overtraining. More sets and training more frequently both expose the muscles to great cumulative workload, which signals a stronger stimulus for muscle growth. An interesting way to add progressive overload is progressing intensity and tempo. Reducing the rest period between sets can increase the difficulty of the workout and provide a greater challenge. Changing the tempo of an exercise can be highly effective too. For instance, slowing down the lowering phase, known as eccentric, or adding pauses at a specific point of a movement can increase time under tension and increase muscle activation. Slowed movements and pauses also allow you to use a lower weight, reducing the risk of injury. Progressing or varying exercise selection is another interesting method of progressive overload. Choosing a more challenging version of an exercise, like moving from wall push-ups to kneeling push-ups and eventually going to full push-ups, is a very effective way of overloading. Switching to a different exercise entirely when you've hit a plateau on a certain exercise can work well too, such as switching from a hack squat to a leg press. This works the same muscle groups but in a slightly different way. Finally, you could improve your form on an exercise. Using online tutorials, filming your form, or even going to a professional for help can improve your technique and make an exercise more challenging. It may be that you have reduced momentum on an exercise and can increase the demand on your muscles that way. So which method is the most effective for muscle growth? The studies show that increasing the number of sets, repetitions, and of the frequency of training for a target muscle will all work as long as they are close to muscular failure. Beginners usually get rapid gains with any form of overload, so to keep it simple, they could use the repetition maximum zone or RM zone method. This involves choosing a set rep scheme such as 8 to 12, then increasing the weight once they hit the upper end of that rep scheme. This method uses something called auto-regulation, which means that if you're tired, you don't have to progress, but if you feel good, you can push yourself more. Beginners should be particularly careful about form though, and not rush to up the weight. For the intermediate or advanced lifter, a good training plan will incorporate all types of progressive overload at some point, but all lifters will be limited by genetic differences, their training history, injuries, and their ability to recover. Over time, you will find what works for you individually. Once you find what methods work for you and use them to increase the intensity, you might find that every so often you'll need to reduce the intensity for a week or so. Renaissance periodization recommends using a deload week in a muscle growth phase, just like a powerlifter would, while they increase strength.
For the people that want best results, that train hard, most of those folks are going to be able to go for about 4 to 6 weeks of hard training, 3 to 6 weeks, and then need a deload. Very few people can train real hard for 5 weeks plus straight without benefiting greatly from a deload. So every 4 to 6 weeks for most people, volume and load and relative effort should decline markedly. Less weight, fewer reps, fewer sets, not pushing us close to failure.
If you want to check the studies mentioned, the links are in the description below. If you enjoyed the video, then please hit the like button and follow the channel. And if you know someone else who could benefit from this information, then be sure to share it with them.